I'm going to start off by saying that this is not sponsored by GitHub. I have worked with GitHub, but this is not sponsored. This is an issue that I felt firsthand working at Charm, which maintained an insane amount of open source projects, is that with the rise of AI, it's put immense pressure on open source maintainers. It's being seen as a threat to the entire future of open source and what it means for the culture of open source, because open source has historically been a place where experienced developers or even less experienced developers can create projects and collaborate with other developers who love programming and who are interested in contributing to their project. This has generally been a culture where the contributions are being counted towards the welfare of the project itself and less so about the kind of more self-serving nature of showing off your contributions towards a specific project. Now, that's not to say that you can't leverage your open source experience for jobs. Otherwise, it makes you a bad person. Like, it's totally fine and it's very normal to do that, especially these days. However, the problem that we're now running into is that the cost to contribute is less than the cost to maintain. So being that kind of filter of quality contributions and whether or not the implementation matches kind of your idea and design of your system is now the most time-consuming bottleneck of these projects. And it was already a lot of work to be a maintainer of open source projects. And now that work is seemingly growing exponentially with the ability to do a lot of like low effort, lazy contributions where someone can just come up with an idea and say, I think that this idea would look really good in this project, and then make a pull request for it and never look at it again. You know what I mean? It's not the same as in the past. It would have required a certain amount of effort to get to know the system, get to know what the issues were in that community, understand the problem, go back and forth with someone with more expertise in that code base, usually a maintainer of some kind, to be able to fine tune your solution to match what they're looking for. But with this kind of hands-off approach to open source contribution, it's put a lot of pressure on maintainers. So I am very curious about what GitHub is thinking about doing to kind of remedy this or work with this, because GitHub is the biggest platform for open source projects. Whether you use GitHub or not, that is just kind of the undisputed truth in 2026. So let's see what they're thinking. So they're saying that open source is hitting what they call an eternal September. As contribution friction drops, maintainers are adapting with new trust signals, triage approaches, and community-led solutions. Now, I will open this to say that when I was at Charm, one way that I tried to kind of encourage users to do these kind of best practices, because I think a lot of people have the right motivations behind their contributions, but they don't necessarily know the kind of like manners, so to speak. So for example, before you submit a pull request, you're much better off creating an issue first and getting that feature approved by a maintainer. It's a little bit different for bug fixes. Bug fixes are generally speaking a good place where you can, if you can reproduce it on your machine and somebody has reported it as well, like you could probably get away with just trying to put together a fix. Feature is a little bit of a different thing because it then adds surface area for maintenance of the project. So features are a bit of a bold thing to just kind of pull out of your pocket and stamp on a project and dip out. There is some etiquette there that I think a lot of people miss. And that was part of why at Charm, I had these kind of like contributing checklists for people. So I created a PR template on a lot of our projects that had a checklist stating, I have created an issue for this new feature. I have gotten this feature approved by a maintainer, and you had to link that issue or discussion. Because I think at that time too, there were a lot of projects, we were getting a lot of issues that weren't issues. They were more so questions or feature requests that we weren't planning on acting on, at least right away. And it was cluttering the issue backlog. There were a lot of duplicates and things like that. So I did end up moving a lot of our stuff to discussions so that it would be a bit of a less intrusive way of doing things. Even in hindsight, I don't know if that was the best approach or not. It's kind of one of those things where when there's a certain amount of volume coming in, it can be really hard to kind of pinpoint what is the best approach. And I felt like discussions were a lot harder to manage. So for example, you'll get notifications for issues. If somebody comments on an issue that you've replied to, you'll get notified of that. But I don't think, if I recall correctly, notifications weren't quite set up that way with discussions. And it was a lot harder to kind of query what discussions were created that week and what was relevant. So for example, I used GitHub Dash a lot, which is a TUI for, you can look at issues and pull requests through there. And it's a really great way you can do like custom queries and stuff. So you can filter it by like your teammates, or you can filter it by things that have like a certain number of comments and things like that. So you can tell that there's like a certain amount of community interest or engagement with it. But I did find that discussions were a lot more limited in that scope. So anyway, if you are a maintainer and you have different tips and tricks that you've learned that help you, I mean, let me know in the comments, because that was always a very interesting problem to try and solve and make some wrangle the chaos to an extent. But let's see how they're thinking about doing this. And this is written by Ashley Wolf, so shout outs to Ashley. Okay, open collaboration runs on trust. For a long time, that trust was protected by a natural and imperfect filter: friction. If you were on Usenet in 1993, you'll remember that every September, a flood of new university students would arrive online, unfamiliar with the norms, and the community would patiently onboard them. Sounds very reminiscent to the open source space. The mainstream dial-up ISPs became popular, and a continuous influx of new users came online. It became the September that never ended. Today, open source is experiencing its own eternal September, and this time it's not just new users, it's the sheer volume of contributions. In the era of mailing lists, contributing to open source projects required real effort. You had to subscribe, lurk, understand the culture, format a patch correctly, and explain why it mattered. The effort didn't guarantee quality, but it filtered for engagement. This is a really good point. I think that most experienced developers, most people that are looking for mentees, you need a certain baseline skill, certain baseline competency for that. But I think a lot of what they're looking for is like a can-do attitude, and I'm willing to listen, actively listen, and apply what you want to teach me. And I'm excited about it, and I genuinely want to improve. I think that there's something really special about when you find somebody that is in the same area of interest as you, and you have more experience, and you're able to kind of see that like twinkle in their eye of them being super excited about this thing where you once felt that same way, or you still feel that same way, and you're able to kind of propel them forward in that, and you can bond over that. Like, that is a very sacred and special kind of dynamic that you can create with a mentor and as a mentee. But that is something that was always really good to foster in open source. And again, that was something that I think there was a lot of like patience in, or not with every, okay, I've seen the Linus Torvalds emails, not with every open source maintainer, but a lot of maintainers have a lot of like patience and desire to help less experienced developers become better developers and like share what they've learned. Okay, so most contributions came from somebody who had genuinely engaged with the project. It also excluded people. The barrier to entry was high. Many projects worked hard to lower it in order to make open source more welcoming. A major shift came with the pull request. Hosting projects on GitHub using pull requests and labeling good first issues reduced the friction needed to contribute. Communities grew and contributions became more accessible. But friction is a balancing act. Too much keeps people and their ideas out, and too little friction can strain the trust open source depends on. Today, a pull request can be generated in seconds, and generative AI makes it easy for people to produce code, issues, or security reports at scale. The cost to create has dropped, but the cost to review has not. It's worth saying that most contributors are acting in good faith. Many want to help projects they care about. This is very true. I don't think that there's people that are contributing to open source like truly nefariously. You know, like some people are contributing to it because they know that it's good for their career, and so they're trying to like add something to their resume. I understand that. I do think that that can be the kind of situation that leads people to want to artificially inflate their numbers in terms of like impact, how much the code they're writing, how many open source projects they're like. It can turn into a numbers game for some people, which is potentially part of the problem. But I think for the most part, it's just a lot of people that want to help and want to reap the benefits as well of like being part of an open source project, learning, connecting with other developers. I mean, it's a great place to be. It's a great space to be in. It's just unfortunate that there's a bit of a bottleneck with it where there's an imbalance of like people wanting something from the project and people that are able to give something from that project, if that makes sense. Those incentives aren't new and they aren't wrong. The challenge is what happens when low quality contributions arrive at scale. And this is like very typical. I was noticing like daily we were getting many more contributions per day. It's not even like, oh, sometimes there are like certain months where we get a lot of contributions, or like, you know, it's not even like it's coming in batches or sporadically. It's like pretty consistent increase in volume when people are basically just doing completely like AI generated PRs. When volume accelerates faster than review capacity, even well-intended submissions can overwhelm maintainers. And when that happens, trust, which is the foundation of open collaboration, starts to strain. I personally don't fully understand the motive behind AI generated PRs. I can kind of get it for like bug fixes and things like that, where it's like a quality of life improvement for a core feature that already exists within the piece of software. However, even then it's like, okay, make sure that you have tests, make sure that you are able to like have all of the surface area kind of covered so that we can prevent this thing from happening again. And it's taking a burden off of maintainers. I would say the biggest point of friction or like things that add pressure to maintainers is feature requests. Like you are also completely allowed to fork a project. Like, okay, check out the license first, right? But you can fork a project and add whatever features you want to that project. And it can live indefinitely on your GitHub with those features. However, I don't know that like adding in new features to an existing project that then it increases the maintenance burden on maintainers, because every new feature, it does increase that, because then it's like if something goes wrong with that feature, that's now a bug that needs to get fixed, that has to be prioritized. And like it is so much more of a weighted contribution that a lot of people don't seem to get that. I don't really understand why you would do AI generated PRs when you are genuinely trying to learn. If you haven't written any of the code yourself, you haven't like reviewed any of the code yourself, I think AI can be a great learning tool, and it can be a great way to figure out, you know, different loopholes in how you code, different ways you can improve, comparing it, even your code to how other people code, like even understanding other people's code. It's an outstanding tool for learning. I just don't understand why people would just purely vibe code an open source contribution. Like, can someone explain that to me? Can someone please explain that to me? Because I don't get it. All right. It is tempting to frame low quality contributions or AI slop contributions as a unique recent phenomenon, but it isn't. Maintainers have always dealt with noisy inbound. Very true. The Linux kernel operates under a web of trust philosophy and formalized its submitting patches guide and introduced the developer certificate of origin in 2004 for a reason. Mozilla and GNOME built a formal triage system around the reality that most incoming bug reports need filtering before maintainers invested deeper time. This is true, and this is also a really good way that you can contribute to open source projects that you use and love, is like validating whether or not you're able to reproduce a bug on your machine and giving the details about your machine and the steps that you took to reproduce the bug. Because sometimes it's like user error, and it takes having that second level of validation is like, oh, okay, this might actually be a problem with the software and not just like someone doesn't know how this thing works. You know, they're using it improperly. There are also automated scanners. Long before generative AI, maintainers dealt with waves of automated security and code quality reports from commercial and open source scanning tools. You know, CodeBot, I see you. The question from maintainers has often been the same. Are you trying to help me or just help yourself? Just because a tool, whether a static analyzer or an LLM, makes it easy to generate a report or a fix, that doesn't mean that contribution is valuable to the project. The ease of creation often adds a burden to the maintainer because there's an imbalance of benefit. The contributor maybe gets the credit or the CVE or the visibility, while the maintainer gets the maintenance burden. Maintainers are feeling that directly. For example, curl ended its bug bounty program after AI-generated security reports exploded, taking hours to validate. Projects like Ghosty are moving to invitation-only contribution models, requiring discussion before accepting code contributions. That is very similar to what I was trying out at Charm. It did help, but again, I felt like specifically the GitHub discussions, there was like room for improvement there. There were some features lacking there that made it really hard to like track. You couldn't track anything. So you'd have to convert it to an issue before you could track anything. But sometimes you're waiting for a response from them to verify whether or not it's still an issue. Oh, have you tried this? You know, like there's back and forth with these things, and so you just wouldn't hear back in your notifications. You'd have to go manually check, which is a lot to do for like large open source projects. Multiple projects are adopting explicit rules about AI generated contributions. These are rational responses to an imbalance. So let's see what they're doing at GitHub. At GitHub, we aren't just watching this happen. Maintainer sustainability is foundational to open source and foundational to us. As the home of open source, we have a responsibility to help you manage what comes through the door. We are approaching this from multiple angles, shipping immediate relief now while building longer-term systemic improvements. Some of this is about tooling. Some is about creating clearer signals so maintainers can decide where to spend their limited time. I will say, I do think that GitHub does a really good job of trying to get their support their maintainers. They do like roundtables with open source maintainers on a regular basis. They'll email a bunch of different maintainers of a bunch of different popular projects, and they will like hear out their concerns, and it'll be in that roundtable format where other maintainers can chime in on, you know, different workarounds or different problems that they're encountering and things like that. They do genuinely listen to their maintainers. I think it's really cool that they have that like maintainer funding program. I can't remember what it was, but I think there is like a thing where you can vote for maintainers to get sponsorships from GitHub. There's like different things that they're doing to just help maintainers monetize what they do so that they can just focus on coding. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing. I think that's a really good, positive thing in the space. Okay, so here are some of the features that they've already shipped. Okay, repo level pull request controls. This gives a maintainer the option to limit pull request creation to collaborators or disable pull requests entirely. While the introduction of the pull request was fundamental to the growth of open source, maintainers should have the tools that they need to manage their projects. I don't think that there was a kind of like view only mode. I think it was just like a private with collaborators, or it was public. So that is very interesting. Pinned comments on issues. You can now pin a comment to the top of an issue that's so nice. That is so nice, because so many people ask the same thing. I mean, it's for what it's worth. I mean, I feel like it's not that hard to like scroll to the bottom and see what the latest update was on an issue, but some people ain't be reading out here. Some people are not reading in 2026. I'm not gonna, for real. Okay. Banners to reduce comment noise. Experience fewer unnecessary notifications with a banner that encourages people to react or subscribe instead of leaving noise like +1 or something. Yeah. You want to see something overwhelming? You look at the GitHub notification inbox for anyone who maintains a large open source project. It's insane. It's unmanageable. You never get through it. Okay, pull request performance improvements. So pull request diffs have been optimized for greater responsiveness, and large pull requests in the new files changes to experience to respond up to 67% faster. I'm gonna be honest, I think I'm somebody who doesn't really notice this stuff that much. But there's some of you where that was driving you crazy, and now it's fixed. So, all right. So faster issue navigation. You get easier bug triage thanks to significantly improved speeds when browsing and navigating issues as a maintainer. Okay. So some speed improvements, and you can temporarily enforce a period of limited activity for certain users. Interesting. So it's not quite banning people on a public repo. Can you ban? I don't know if you can ban people on a public repo. You should be able to. Be like, silence, you fool. I don't want to hear it again. This is like the timeouts on Twitch. You're going to go sit in a corner for 10 minutes because I don't want to hear what you have to say. All right. Coming soon, they have pull request deletion from the UI. Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. You get people that'll PR to add a link to their blog in your README for like an open source project, And then you end up having to close it. And then you have a lot, like you end up with a huge backlog of like closed pull requests that give you zero helpful information about the project. Okay, next steps. We know that walls don't build communities. As we explore next steps, our focus is on giving maintainers more control while helping protect what makes open source communities work. Some of the directions we're exploring in consultation with maintainers include criteria-based gating, which requires a linked issue before a pull request can be opened, or defining rules that contributions must meet before submission. This is really good. So Before, I had a pull request template for Charm that had like checkboxes where it was like, I have created a discussion, a maintainer approved me creating the pull request. This was more so for features. Again, like bug fixes, generally not so bad. The biggest bottleneck for bug fixes in my experience is like validation of, is this user error or is this an actual reproducible error? And often just getting one person to chime in and say that it is or isn't, like, this worked on my machine, or I experienced like this is what happened on my machine, whatever is helpful. But most of the time, if it's new features and stuff, it's just, it can add so much clutter to the project. Okay, improve triage tools, potentially leveraging automated triage to evaluate contributions against a project's own guideline. Ooh, that would actually be nice. In Surface which pull requests should get your attention first. I think that's really good. I think there's a lot of like back and forth that could be streamlined with more like automated responses, in a sense of like, hey, you need to check out the contributing.md, or like, this is a question that I have about this project, so I'm asking it as an issue. And then it's like, hey, this is actually mentioned at this part in the README, like that kind of stuff. But then I'm like, that is so surface level that I feel like that is fine to kind of automate away. But I do think that it's very sad if imagine you go to like contribute to an open source project and it's like when you go to contact support at Amazon or something, and it's like, I guess Amazon has like decent support, but like somewhere where it's just like, it's only AI agents forever. All right, these tools are meant to support decision making, not replace it. Maintainers should always remain in control. We're also aware of trade-offs. Restriction can disproportionately affect first-time contributors acting in good faith. That's why these controls are optional and configurable. I mean, for what it's worth, restrictions, also like a bad attitude, like scary maintainers will also scare off first-time contributors. I think they'll find a project that's suitable for them, One of the things I love most about open source is that when the community hits a wall, people build ladders. We're seeing that a lot right now. Maintainers across the ecosystem are experimenting with different approaches. Some projects have moved to invitation-only workflows. Others are building custom GitHub actions for contributor triage and reputation scoring. Michelle Hashimoto's Vouch project is an interesting example. It implements an explicit trust management system where contributors must be vouched for by trusted maintainers before they can participate. Very interesting. It's experimental and some aspects will be debated, but it fits a longer lineage from Advocato's trust metric to Drupal's credit system to the Linux kernels signed off by chain. Interesting. At the same time, many communities are investing heavily in education and onboarding to widen who can contribute while setting clearer expectations. This is true. It's kind of like you don't know how to contribute to open source until you've tried it and maybe gotten a slap on the wrist or maybe gotten like gently guided towards like open source etiquette, And it's different for every project too. So it's kind of tricky. Maybe that's what you guys can ask your AI, your AI agent. Hello, how do I contribute to this project and not be rude? Reference their contributing.md file and reference their existing issues and pull requests for context. Thank you. The Python community, for example, emphasizes contributor guides, mentorship, and clearly labeled entry points. Kubernetes points strong governance with extensive documentation and contributor education, helping new contributors understand not just how to contribute, but what a useful contribution looks like. These approaches aren't mutually exclusive. Education also helps good faith actors succeed. Guardrails help maintainers manage scale. There's no single right way to do it. That's why we're excited to see maintainers building tools that match their project's specific values. The tools communities built around the platform often become the proving ground from what might eventually become features, so we're paying close attention. Yeah, this is something that I would really agree with. The concept of contribution on GitHub is mostly code oriented. I think that there's a lot more you can contribute to projects that add significant helpfulness that is not in code. And I think that could be why we're seeing so much like lazier PRs and stuff like that, because they want like a low cost way, low investment way for them to like get their foot in the door or say I contributed to this project or whatever. Because like code is the only like metric used to show that you're contributing. If you're like a super engaged community member, that doesn't really show up on GitHub, which is where typically a lot of developers are sharing as like their resume kind of thing, So I agree. I think it would be really nice to have a better way to celebrate kind of like, different forms of contributions. It could be cool to have like a point system. I know that I think online communities, I want to say like Discourse and stuff, have kind of like a point system. So the more engaged that you are as a community member, the higher your ranking, the higher your points, and that makes you kind of a bit of a more trusted person in the space. Love that. Let me know what you guys thought about that. I think it is a very interesting time in the world that we're experiencing. This does really give me hope. I've been a little bit concerned about what the future of open source would look like, because it has been so human and so like community oriented and stuff like that. And I've spoken to a lot of different open source maintainers, a lot of different people in the open source space, and it already was a lot of pressure on them pre everyone using AI to manage the influx of contributions and just interest in general. So I was genuinely very concerned about how that was all going. But I mean, it could just be so nice if we just all get a bit more educated on like etiquette in open source, and if we respect that, and in the cases where that is not being respected, there can be a little slap on the wrist, a little like something to help enforce the rules. You got to follow the rules sometimes. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in a future video. Bye for now.